Hi, I'm Brad Young with the North Carolina Institute of Political Leadership. Today we're talking rural broadband with Patrick Woodie, the president of the North Carolina Rural Center. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Afternoon. Good to see you.
So this is not a new issue, but certainly one that has received additional interest as a result of COVID in the last 2 years. So if you don't mind, can we talk a little bit about what you've learned the last 2 years and the additional emphasis that has been put on broadband in rural parts of our state?
Yeah. Well, we've focused heavily on broadband, really going back to the early 2000s. The Rural Internet Access Authority was formed by the General Assembly, and they existed for 12 years. And during that 12 years, they were housed at the Rural Center. In recent years, we really shifted our focus to really thinking about the policy aspects of it, because we kept hearing from rural communities that it was top of mind for them. I often encounter urban friends that live primarily in an urban setting, and they often will say to me, "Oh, you're still talking about broadband all the time? Didn't we take care of that years ago? Isn't that problem solved?" And the answer, and that would surprise a lot of people that live in rural communities with really poor broadband service, and there still are far too many rural parts of the state that aren't well served. I will say, where we find ourselves in 2022, after a pandemic, if COVID did anything for us, it kind of really did put a magnifying glass and a bright light on the whole issue of broadband. It became very much top of mind for virtually every family across the state who found themselves at home, many of them with kids, trying to do a lot of things simultaneously. Also trying to figure out remote doctor visits, maybe for the first time that they'd ever really confronted that as a real need. And all of this just tended children trying to do their schoolwork and trying to stay up to date, adults trying to work at home, trying to do so simultaneously, and perhaps finding themselves in an area or a region that the infrastructure would not support all those activities in a single house. And so I think, if anything, for our legislators, they heard loud and clear from their constituents that this was a top of mind concern, and they really did respond in this last session of the North Carolina General Assembly. They've responded both at the federal level and the state level. We find, a few years ago, we were fighting for $15 million appropriation to the state broadband grant program. It's called the GREAT program. But we were really working hard, fighting hard for $15 million to that one program. And now, combined across federal and state, we're well north of $1 billion in new resources because of this pandemic that have been made available for broadband infrastructure.
And I'm glad that you mentioned just the activity that is going around in that particular area, and the awareness and the priority that legislators at a federal and a state level have really put towards the issue. And I wanted to, from your legislative recap, from the Rural Council legislative recap, some of the items that were related to rural broadband. Is there any in particular that jump out or that deserve particular notice on your part that would address some of these things that are new, as opposed to just reinforcing previous efforts?
Well, one thing that you'll see toward the bottom of that list is it talks about digital awareness, literacy campaign. The Institute for Emerging Issues is doing some great work also around digital literacy and equity in broadband. So I think one important thing for your listeners to bear in mind is that broadband isn't only an infrastructure issue. And certainly it is about the infrastructure, particularly if you're in a community that just doesn't have it, or what you do have is really inadequate. Then if the infrastructure isn't there at some point, you can't, you don't have, you don't get to worry about the other pieces of the puzzle. But the other pieces of the puzzle are extremely important. If broadband services are available and you're a family that with low income that can't afford to subscribe, that's a problem. And so we have equity issues for people who can't afford the service, even if the service is available. And then we also have issues of families that need to be able to understand how the internet can improve their lives, how it can really make a difference in their own lives. I think the pandemic really helped probably raise everybody's awareness level about those different issues, whether it's going to school or trying to keep up with remote learning classes, whether it's trying to see a doctor and use telehealth maybe for the first time that you've ever used it, whether it's having the ability to work from home but needing to connect in order to do so. So digital literacy and affordability are two other additional big issues that have been addressed by the General Assembly to some extent in recent legislation. It's not only infrastructure. Most of the money will go to infrastructure and building it, and that's badly needed. And we've got a historic opportunity, I think, to really make transformational progress around broadband. The question for me, and that what really keeps us awake and worried at the Rural Center, is will the communities and the areas and the regions of our state that really do not have adequate last mile internet service, will they be able to kind of take advantage of this transformational moment and access the funding that has been set aside for this purpose? That's the big question, and one that we're focused very acutely on.
And as you identified, with the money that has been dedicated to this particular issue, we're not the only state that is working towards this goal. In fact, we're in pretty good company as far as that. So there's a bit of a race,
absolutely,
a competition of resources. Can you talk through a little bit of the challenges that poses?
Well, the challenges that it poses is, is the world of broadband construction, of laying fiber, of doing fixed wireless projects, and everything that goes along with that. There's very high demand now because the market is so full of resources, and these grant resources that will lead to construction projects. And there's a really high demand on people that are part of this industry and on the companies that are part of this industry. So that's going to be a challenge, is just at a time when so many states across the country are trying to accomplish the same thing. The companies and the contractors, the construction folks that are in this particular sector are going to be under very high demand.
Well, and we highlighted the work that's already been done in the last legislative session, the last budget, related to the issue. But looking ahead to the next legislative session, what is the Rural Center pursuing or looking into or encouraging legislators to take action on?
Well, several things that we will be watching for, and will probably lead to our advocacy around broadband in the short session and beyond, is, as you may know, the State Broadband Office has rolled out the first round of great grants. So they've just opened a grant round on January 31st. It'll close on April 4th. $350 million, I think, is available in this first round of grants. And so the big thing that we're all going to be watching is to see what is the volume of demand for those funds. How many projects get submitted, asking for how much money. I think that's going to tell us a lot about whether the steps the General Assembly has taken have been adequate, and whether or not adjustments need to be made in the context of the legislation. And that's kind of our first checkpoint, I think, really. Second thing that we're watching closely is, as many people know, broadband maps are notoriously not reliable. So the FCC is our primary source of data and maps, and as many of your listeners probably are aware, up until now, the data that is reflected on those maps is self-reported data from the providers themselves. And there's some quirks about it. For example, if one home in a census tract is served with high-speed internet, then the entire census tract is counted as being served, when that is not, may well be that that's not the case on the ground. I think one recent FCC map of North Carolina says that 90% of the households in North Carolina have access to high-speed broadband. And that is not and we know that's not reality on the ground. There is a new mapping process in place that's working its way through the FCC. There's an appeals process going on before those new maps get published. But we expect when those new maps come online, it's going to give us a more accurate picture of reality on the ground. And one other thing that I would point out, and I think even in the state legislation that passed last year, we've been extremely slow at the national level and at the state level to raise our standard for what is broadband. And we stayed at 10 megabits per second download speed, 1 megabit per second upload speed for probably well longer than we should. And we now see with some of, particularly, and COVID helps bring this to light, with the demand with certain like 25 down and 3 up, which is the current minimum of the GREAT grant program. If you're a parent, both parents are working at home doing remote work and needing to do Zoom calls, kids are needing to do schoolwork, that 25.3 is not going to be adequate to support the needs of that household. And so the importance of more symmetrical service and higher speeds is becoming more and more evident every day. And we have been slow at a public policy level at both federal and state to get those standards realistically up to where they need to be. That's something we're going to be watching and advocating always for, more symmetrical upload and download speeds at a higher level.
Well, thank you for this. And I do appreciate your time today. This is a particularly important issue just to keeping these rural communities vital, and people have the ability to live and work, raise children there. This has become one of the most important infrastructure issues of our day. So thank you so much for your work on that. And I hope that you come back and update us after this legislative session. We'll see where we are.
Thank you. Look forward to that.